This is Haley Solomon with the North Carolina Housing Coalition. Thank you for joining us this morning for our housing call. And without further ado, I will turn it over to our Director of Housing Policy, Stephanie Watkins-Cruz.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you all are having a great week so far. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off with some organizational updates. Today, we are releasing our 2024 county profiles. Our county profiles, as most of you know, are meant to be an accessible tool that advocates and organizations alike can use to communicate a snapshot of the housing need within their communities to a range of different audiences. So each of our profiles provides data on cost burden, the income needed to afford fair market rent, and where the county ranks in evictions compared to the rest of the state. So before we jump into the rest of the housing call, I just want to highlight a few things from this year's profile. This year, we're including another profile for the state, so there will be a total of 101 profiles. And we've also added 2 new data points. We've added the increase in fair market rents over the last 5 years, so that's between 2019 and 2023, and the increase in fair market rents over the last year. We did this specifically to try and communicate and show how much the cost of living has increased both pre-pandemic and in the post-pandemic and in the last 5 years alone. In some places, there was an increase as high as 69% in the fair market rents over the last 5 years, and as high as 34% just in the last year alone. We also found in our data analysis that more than 1 in 4 North Carolinians, which is over 1.1 million households, can't afford their home, meaning they are cost burdened and paying more than 30% of their gross income. And this number includes renters and homeowners. The housing wage that is needed to afford a 2-bedroom apartment at fair market rent in many counties is double, and in some places quadruple, the minimum wage, meaning that no one earning a minimum wage can afford a 2-bedroom at fair market rent in any county across North Carolina. Remember, the housing wage is the wage needed to be able to afford a 2-bedroom apartment at fair market rent. I won't give anything more away yet, because we have a full blog post that we'll link in the call notes that goes into more detail about some additional data highlights. But I also wanted to highlight some resources that we'll be releasing alongside the profiles today, and then some of the other things we'll be working on releasing in the coming weeks to help you use and add this resource to your advocacy toolkit and make it as effective as possible. We'll also be adding a methodology one-pager that just provides not only where we got all the data from, but how we use the data and how we approach getting the numbers that we've placed on each profile. We also have data tables, so you'll be able to see all the data that are on the profiles just in an Excel spreadsheet form. In the next few weeks, we'll also be releasing another blog post around frequently asked questions about the county profiles. A lot of times we get asked, why don't you add the point in time count? Or if this number went down, how do I prevent someone from misusing that decrease? So we want to try and get ahead of some of those things and help folks get ahead of some of those questions, and also just be as transparent as possible, not only about how impactful this data can be, but as with all data, its limitations as well. We also will be releasing tips on how to effectively use this tool for advocacy and information sharing. So keep a lookout for the next few weeks on those resources coming to you as well. Our blog post will be linked in the call notes, and we'll have some additional data highlights for you to look over. Moving over to federal updates. A few days ago, the Supreme Court of the United States decided that they will hear Johnson versus Grants Pass, which is a case that will decide if people experiencing homelessness who are sleeping outside or in tent encampments can be fined or jailed. This particularly impacts folks in California and in the West, but obviously this impacts homelessness as an issue across our entire country. But this is as a result of a lot of the efforts that have been happening by officials in California and the West to clear homeless encampments. They're acting on the appeals from city officials actually in California and the West, and they'll review decisions of the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. This particular court of appeals held that it was cruel and unusual punishment for cities to deny people experiencing homelessness a place to sleep. And so as a result of that ruling, a lot of public officials and in California and the remaining 8 Western states that are under that sort of Ninth Circuit will actually be facing greater scrutiny and legal challenges when they try and move or clear encampments or try and relocate people experiencing homelessness. So we're going to keep an eye on that. Last week, we released an urgent advocacy alert regarding what we have learned could be the last chances to include critical Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act provisions in an agreed-upon tax package that is still under development. We ask that you continue to reach out to all of your representatives in Congress and ask them to reach out to congressional and tax writing committee leadership in support of the housing credit. In order to see a full list of the congressional representatives from North Carolina, as well as the provisions that we really want to highlight for that advocacy push, please see the call notes. We'll have both of those documents linked there for you. A deal has been reached on another short-term funding bill that would avert a partial government shutdown. For those that don't know, since today is January 16th, we are technically 3 days away from a partial government shutdown. However, on Sunday, January 14th, congressional leaders announced that they have reached an agreement on a short-term funding bill that could fund the government through March 1st and March 8th. The current funding bill was passed in November and had deadlines of January 19th and February 2nd. If this deal passes, and it would have to pass very quickly, this would be the third short-term spending deal that Congress has reached since September 2023. An agreement last week was struck between Speaker Johnson, Leader Schumer, and the White House on top-line spending, which is what seems to be the reason why there is a chance for spending bills to pass and for this agreement to have come into existence. The agreement is to fund domestic programs at $772.7 billion, plus an additional $69 billion in additional funding through a side agreement. Just want to highlight a few things that could be actually a consequence of, continuing to go this route of continuing resolutions. So remember that continuing resolution just means maintaining fiscal year 23 funding levels without any revisions to address new or changed needs in fiscal year 24. Obviously, we do not want a shutdown, but these are some of the consequences and results of going the continuing resolution route. And because the cost of housing and development programs are tied to market rates, which continue to rise dramatically, flat funding essentially has the effect of a budget cut and will ultimately reduce the number of people that are able to be served by HUD's vital affordable housing and homelessness programs. Additionally, if this pattern continues, if any appropriation bills are still under continuing resolution by April 30th, then this actually triggers the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the FRA, which was passed last year, and dictates if any of the 12 annual federal appropriation bills are still under CR by April 30th, then across-the-board spending cuts will occur. So we're keeping an eye on that. It looks like there will be some votes held today, and hopefully we can move forward to ultimately a spending agreement that does not result in a shutdown again. Moving on to state updates. A lot of folks have been reaching out to us around the proposed insurance premium hikes for our state. We are still keeping an eye on this as it develops and trying to learn as much as we can about some of the details and context behind it. So we will continue to highlight this as a major concern because it does impact everyone across our state, as homeowners, renters, renter developers, property managers. So we want to continue to highlight it. We're going to add, we have 2 additional pieces that I just want to lift up under this particular issue. Carolina Forward yesterday released another piece that provides some additional insight on the proposed insurance hikes, and it's from the perspective of one of the senior fellows who's also an independent insurance agent. So he provides a lot of insight on not only why this is happening within the insurance market all over the country, but also what legislative action could have been taken to possibly mitigate some of these price increases. Another piece that you'll find in the news section, but that I want to lift up earlier, It's by Fast Company. The housing market is being hit by home insurance shocks, and it shows maps that are the most vulnerable areas across the country when it comes to home insurance shocks. So the maps look at a percentage of housing properties identified as at risk for insurance corrections due to wind, fire, and flood risk, which are often what the stated reasons for increases in premiums are. Now, here's the catch. Even if the homes have lower levels of insurance correction risk, they could still experience their home insurance premium increases or non-renewed for fire, wind, and flood. So this could also happen in part because construction costs and home prices have surged significantly since 2020, which makes repairs and completing claims even more expensive. A lot of great details in there. If you're a visual person like me, the maps do a really great job of highlighting those different levels of risk across the country. Some reminders about public input opportunities around the proposed insurance increases. A public comment forum will be held to listen to public input on the North Carolina Bureau's rate increase request on January 22nd from 10 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. in the Department of Insurance's Jim Long Hearing Room. And the Jim Long Hearing Room is in the Albemarle building, and the address is 325 North Salisbury Street, Raleigh, North Carolina. You can also participate virtually, and we've included the link to that method of participation in the call notes. You can email your comments to by February 2nd to ncdoi.2024homeowners@ncdoi.gov. You can also send in your written public comments also by February 2nd, and the address to do so is linked in the call notes for you as well. Moving on to state legislative updates, state lawmakers are set to convene again tomorrow. They'll convene a few more times before the beginning of the short session, which is scheduled to begin on April 24th, 2024. But again, we'll continue to monitor any issues as well as committee meetings that may have an impact on housing or related issues. Some relevant General Assembly meetings coming up that we'll be watching: the Joint Legislative Commission on Governmental Operations. Their subcommittee on hurricane recovery and response is meeting at 10 a.m. on January 23rd. We've also been eyeing the House Select Committee on Homeowner Associations. They'll be meeting again on Wednesday, January 24th at 10 a.m. And then the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee on General Government is meeting on Tuesday, January 30th at 1 p.m. Moving over to local updates, Knightdale officials don their hard hats for affordable housing. Knightdale elected officials and town employees recently teamed up with Habitat of Lake County for a construction workday at the Habitat community currently under construction. In addition to lending their time to help out with the build, the town is actually also assisting Habitat with infrastructure improvements and utility easements, which help keep development costs low. So great example of a partnership there. 11 local real estate associations across central North Carolina are administering a housing needs assessment survey. So members of the public and employers from what has been recently rebranded as the Carolina Core, which is the region in North Carolina roughly from Winston-Salem, then going southeast to Fayetteville, and includes Alamance, Caswell, Chatham, Cumberland, Davidson, Davie, Forsyth, Guilford, Harnett, Polk, Johnston, Lee, Montgomery, Moore, Person, Randolph, Rockingham, Stokes, Wilkes, and Yadkin counties are invited to complete this short survey. There is both a public survey and an employer survey to try and gauge the housing needs in the region from those two particular perspectives. Y'all know I'm a fan of surveys, and I'm a fan of engagement opportunities. So please, if you are in any of those counties, please take a moment to look at that survey and being honest about the housing needs in those areas. Carteret County, at a recent council meeting, Morehead City officials actually approved a 168-unit affordable development that is situated outside of the 100-year floodplain. The development, which will be named Elijah's Landing, is actually made possible through a combination of federal funds allocated through the North Carolina Office of Resiliency and Recovery, in addition to a HUD multifamily loan and a 4% LIHTC bond deal. So great example of how many different sources of funding have to come together to make affordable housing actually happen. Moving on to events. Tomorrow, the Economy for All Building a Better North Carolina event at 6:30 p.m. It's an in-person event at the Hayti Heritage Center in Durham, hosted by our friends at the North Carolina Budget and Tax Center. Don't miss it. It's set to be a really great event and really great speaker planned. On January 18th, the second part of the Housing Technology Series, Planning for a New Supply, will be happening from 1 to 2:30. It's a webinar hosted by HUD and the Turner Housing Innovation Lab. Also want to just lift up that on January 25th, there's a live stream report released by the Joint Center for Housing Studies of Harvard University for the State of America's Rental Housing 2024. And there are several other events here, but I just want to move through the rest of our updates a bit faster. In reports and resources, there is a report by the Urban Institute that is titled Place to Blame Where It Belongs, Lack of Housing Supply is Largely Responsible for High Home Prices and Rents, a perspective on just how critical lack of supply is for our affordable housing crisis. And in the news, the piece that I mentioned earlier by Fast Company about the housing market being hit by home insurance shocks and those maps, again, I'll lift that one up as well. There's a piece from the New York Times titled An Income Gap is Jeopardizing Retirement for Millions of Americans. And another piece in the New York Times that states, as utility bills rise, low-income Americans struggle for access to clean energy. A lot of great pieces in that section for you all to check out. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. Take a moment to look up your county profiles. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you next time.